Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris, and our guest today is Attorney Dina Sharuk. Our topic is ICE, enforcement in local jails. Thank you for watching. Counselor, could you just tell our audience your background, just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a lawyer at the Legal Aid Justice Center. I graduated from Northeastern University School of Law. At the Legal Aid Justice Center, I work for the Immigrant Advocacy Program, where I manage the Immigration Law Clinic for the University of Virginia School of Law, and I also teach refugee and asylum law at the University of Virginia School of Law.
Okay, well, let's tell us about ICE. ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and how that relate to what we're talking about. For instance, what is the current policy of the ACRJ with respect to notifying immigration and customs and law enforcement?
Sure. So let's get a few definitions right out of the way from
that's a
the
good
from
idea.
the start. Yeah. So ICE, as you had mentioned, is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and those are kind of the immigration police. They operate internally, and the ACRJ is our local jail here in Charlottesville. That's the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail. So what we're talking today about is a bit about the policy that our local jail has with respect to facilitating ICE's work. So if somebody were to be arrested and they were not a U.S. citizen, the state of Virginia has mandated that the jail at the booking stage notify several law enforcement, including ICE, of that person's presence at the jail. Usually, ICE would then issue what's called an ICE detainer to the jail, asking for several requests, one of which would be a phone call before somebody is released from the jail. Where that gets a bit tricky is the fact that that call could happen when somebody, for example, pays their bond. So a judge has said, they're not a danger to the community, and they should be released while their case is pending. But ICE may very well be waiting for them in the parking lot of the jail because of this policy.
Now, you mentioned they have the Commonwealth has a agreement with ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. Is this just for immigration or immigrants, or is this for all the folks that they arrest or detain?
Well, ICE should only be theoretically arresting people who are immigrants in violation of immigration law, theoretically. Sometimes they catch U.S. citizens in their net, but they don't really have jurisdiction over U.S. citizens. So you can run into that issue.
Okay. So why should the members of the community be concerned about this policy?
Well, there are a few reasons to be concerned about this policy. Firstly, it flouts our criminal justice system. So for example, let's say I'm an immigrant, I commit a low-level crime, let's say being drunk in public, and I'm picked up by the local police department, and they say, come sleep it off at the jail. I go to the jail, I'm charged with a drunk in public, 4 hours passes, I get bond, I'm released on my own recognizance, and I go home, and when I'm going to leave, ICE is waiting for me, in the parking lot, because somebody at the jail has called ICE to say, if you want Dina, come and get Dina. So what happens there is, if I'm placed into immigration detention, I might not have that opportunity to go to my hearing for that drunk in public charge. So, our district attorneys might not have the opportunity to prosecute certain crimes if somebody's being held in detention and not provided back to the community. Another issue is just on its face, this is a separate treatment, a separate criminal justice system essentially for people who aren't U.S. citizens, and that's a bit disconcerting to a lot of us. Finally, there's this kind of family separation issue where a lot of people being picked up might be the breadwinners for their families, and their families may have mixed statuses. Some may be immigrants, some may be U.S. citizens, but if you pick up that, the breadwinner for the household, they pay their bond to leave, and ICE is waiting for them. They might be sitting in detention for a really long time, and that family is going to go without.
Okay. So we have some community members who are seeking to change this.
Yes.
And what would the changes be?
Well, our hope that would be that if ICE is going to pick people up from our jail, they should, adhere to the same standards of any other local law enforcement or law enforcement in general, which is to say they should get a criminal warrant. And they have the ability to do so. When you issue an ICE detainer is not a warrant, it's simply a request. It's completely voluntary whether or not a jail complies with a detainer. But to get around this issue, ICE could just go and seek a criminal warrant. What's important to know about the detainers is that they are not warrants. And what that means is nobody's going before a judge and saying, here's the evidence we have against, let's say, Dina, and we have probable cause to hold her. And then getting a criminal warrant for my arrest. That would make a lot of sense. Then the jail wouldn't just call, ICE to say Dina's going to be released. They would hold on to me legally under that arrest warrant until ICE could come and pick me up.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail has a board. What are their policy?
So there's variety in terms of people's opinions on the board in terms of what should be done here. There are some people on the board who support the current ICE notification policy, which includes the mandatory notification at the front end, which nobody is challenging, but also picking up the phone to say, Dina just got bail. If you want to get her, she's going to be released in an hour or two. And then there are some members on the board who have been pursuing other options, such as halting the phone calls to ICE, but encouraging them to utilize the system called VineLink, which is the Victims Information Notification Everyday System. That's a federally funded system, and it's available to the public where somebody can just register and say, I want to know when Dina is going to be released from the jail, and get that notification. So there are members of the board who are pursuing, stronger relationships with the VineLink system to make sure that it's shored up so that ICE could employ that, use those real federal dollars that are already being put to work to learn when somebody's going to be released from the jail.
Rather than the jail informing them.
Exactly. Rather than having the jail use its own resources to make phone calls to ICE about when somebody's going to be released and keeping tabs on that.
Okay. Is there a cost for the jail to retain these different people for the 2 days or 3 days that they hold them?
So that's a good question. That's a question more about detaining people beyond the time in which they're prescribed to be in the jail. So let's say I get bond. ICE and that detainer may also request that I be held a couple extra days in the jail. There are agreements between ICE and some jails in the state of Virginia to pay to hold on to certain people in those jails. But our local jail here, the ACRJ, does not honor holding people in the jail beyond their prescribed date. So if I get bail and ICE isn't waiting for me in the parking lot, the jail has made a policy not to keep me there waiting for ICE.
So they're doing this voluntarily, just holding on for the next couple of days.
Yes, I mean any jail that decides to honor ICE detainers in the state of Virginia is doing so voluntarily.
Okay. All right. So what can members or the community members do to combat this?
So if members of the community are interested in the ACRJ ending this policy, what they can do is that they can reach out to their local officials and through email, through fax, through letters, through phone calls, and just indicate why they think that this policy is an unfair one and how it's doing harm to our community, which I would argue, this is a policy that harms our public safety.
Well, how does that harm our public safety?
Sure. So when there's a segment of our population, let's say a whole segment of our population are immigrants. If a whole segment of our population believe that immigration and customs enforcement are the same thing as our local law enforcement, what you're saying to them is that they should not trust our local law enforcement. If people are fearful of ICE, then they won't pick up the phone when they're a victim of crime, when they've witnessed a crime, and they won't reach out to, and they won't cooperate with local law enforcement investigating crime. And when a segment of our population won't cooperate with our local law enforcement or is fearful of our local law enforcement, that puts all of us at risk.
So they make that association, ICE, local police, it's the same type of agency.
Sure. I mean, I've had clients in the past who, when in crisis, didn't call the police. They called me because they didn't know what to do.
Okay. What has been ICE's response to reevaluating the local jails policies?
So ICE has been putting pressure on our local jail to uphold the current policy, and they've made varied and at times honestly misleading statements to our jail. In fact, they've started off by saying things like, this is a matter of public safety. We're doing this community, a benefit by removing these individuals from our society and placing them in detention. But when we looked at the data of who was being picked up from the ACRJ and taken into detention, we saw a lot of variety. There were some people with serious charges who were put in detention, but there were also people with very low-level charges or even civil charges who were being picked up, and also people with very serious charges who weren't being picked up at all. So the public safety argument fell a bit flat when we have a current administration that simply seeks to detain all, undocumented individuals, for example.
So you're saying ICE didn't pick and choose who they put into detention?
What's made clear to us is that ICE can only, with these phone calls, pick up the people. They're interested in anybody they can get, but they're only going to be able to pick up the people they can get to in time. And the suggestion would be that these phone calls are not necessarily fostering any kind of public safety benefit. It's just a way to catch, individuals who are undocumented, and that's pretty harmful to our society.
Okay, tell us about the detention process.
Sure. So if
Go ahead.
if somebody is picked up, let's say from the jail, if I'm picked up from the jail and ICE is there, they will take me into custody and take me to a local detention center. And in the past, ICE, in prior administrations, would do its own bond determination, make a decision whether or not they will accept a bond for me on the spot. But that's no longer the case. We're not really seeing that happen. The policies of this current administration are to detain whoever you can get a hold of, essentially. So we're seeing people being placed in detention and waiting, it can be at least 6 weeks before that person gets before a judge to have a bond redetermination. Now, what most people don't know is that when you're in immigration proceedings, you're not entitled to an attorney. And most people who don't have an attorney are going to have far more dire outcomes, such as not getting a bond or being deported without that kind of proper representation. It's just a fact of law that if somebody isn't comfortable with a particular legal system and a particular language, they're going to struggle to defend themselves in any case. But now add to it that, it would be hard for an individual who is a U.S. citizen to represent themselves without, that kind of legal training. Add to it the kind of cultural barriers on top of that.
Okay. So if they don't have any rights, you're saying, as far as when they're detained, but if they have a particular job or something like that, they can't get to their job.
That's right.
Which kind of is detrimental to their family. It kind of creates a circle of poverty right down the line.
That's right. I mean, we've seen cases where somebody was being held at the local jail for not paying their child support, for example. Their family got the money together, they scrounged and pulled it all together and paid the purge. They paid off those child support arrears that they owed. And then ICE was waiting for that person in the parking lot. Now, bear in mind, that's a civil matter, not a criminal matter. So ICE picked that person up and held them in detention. Meanwhile, that person lost their job, and as a result, how much child support are they going to be able to pay during that time.
They're in arrears again, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we're halfway through. Time is going by very quickly. Just remind our audience, welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm their host, Melvin Burris. Our guest is Dina Sharouk, attorney Dina Sharouk, and we're talking about immigration and customs enforcement in our local jails. Okay. How does the sanctuary city fit into all this?
Well, that's a good question. To my knowledge, I don't believe that our area has considered itself a sanctuary city. There are cities across the United States that have identified themselves as such and have said that they're not going to cooperate with ICE whatsoever. That's not been the case here, and that's certainly not something that people are presently asking for with respect to this issue. We're simply asking that that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement be held to the same standard as, say, the FBI. For example, if the FBI wanted to take custody of somebody in our local jail, they would go and get a criminal warrant. They would present their probable cause to a judge. A judge would make an assessment and issue that warrant. They would send that warrant to our local jail, and our jail would have to honor that. All we're saying is that, if this is good for what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If it's good for the FBI, it should be good for ICE. And it seems that, we're giving special treatment to ICE when we're, honoring these extra requests without any kind of judicial oversight.
Well, we talked about the community doing something, but should be our elected officials that should be putting pressure onto the board here to make that change?
Sure. I mean, unfortunately, the vast majority of us are not elected officials. So when I think about it, I think, what can somebody like me do? I'm not an elected official. I can try to educate the public, but I can also reach out to my local official and say, here's why this is, not good for any of us. It puts all of us at risk when whole segments of our society are being targeted. They'll ultimately not trust local law enforcement, and that will make all of us less safe. So if I reach out to the hope is that if I reach out to my elected official or the officials from my area on the board, I may be able to sway their opinion, or at least give them some thought as to what the implications are of a decision like this.
Well, how many members do we have on the board? Do you know?
That's a good question. I believe there are 11 voting members on the board.
And they're appointed by whom? They are appointed by?
So there are representatives from Charlottesville, Nelson County, and Albemarle County. Some of them are elected officials who automatically get seats on the board, and some of them are civilians who apply for these positions.
Mm-hmm. So why is, how, again, we talked about how the community can make an impact, but locally I have not seen a big push to make a change to this policy.
Sure.
Am I missing something?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. I think among certain circles, this is a pretty serious issue. It has been covered in our local media, and there are certainly organizations and individuals who've made a real effort for this issue to come to light. And I would say being here would do that as well.
Okay. What organizations can people contact to be a part of?
Sure.
To make a change?
Well, the Legal Aid Justice Center has played a really large role in this kind of advocacy. There's also CIRAC, which is an immigrant advocacy group here in Charlottesville as well, who's made a lot of effort with regards to this policy as well.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have any, I know you can tell us how to contact the criminal justice.
Yeah, so the Legal Aid Justice Center, you can find us at our website, justiceforall.org, and
well, we have your title on your, just give you a call and you can direct
sure,
people
you can also,
to different agencies.
Sure, you can also give me a call or send me an email as well.
So if you were in charge of all this,
sure.
And with your extensive knowledge and background in immigration, what would you do? Or how would you advise the board and what they should be doing?
That's a great question. I think that what I would advise the board would be to continue with that mandatory notification. Under Virginia law, we have to notify all law enforcement when somebody is booked into the jail. But I would cease the additional phone calls to ICE. I think that the perception that our local law enforcement are the same as Immigration and Customs Enforcement is putting all of us at risk and making residents of our community feel unsafe. I would suggest that if ICE would like to pick somebody up from their jail, they can follow the channels of any other law enforcement agency, which is to go before a judge, present the evidence that you have for the charges you wish to bring, and get a probable cause determination, get that warrant, bring it to the jail. Then the jail would have no option but to comply with that warrant.
Yeah, but that's another step for ICE, I guess, to do all that.
Sure.
And additional costs, I guess, is what they're trying to eliminate.
Well, I think that logistics aren't really an argument against, civil liberties.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be easy for the FBI to just go and pick people up from the parking lot without a warrant. But the reason why we have the Fourth Amendment was to protect us from illegal searches and seizures. ICE isn't going through the rigors of that kind of probable cause determination. And as a result, we're saying that people who aren't from here, are worth somehow less when it comes to constitutional rights. So I think it seems pretty straightforward to me when I think about it that way.
Right. Well, have you presented your arguments before the board before?
Yes, so the board was, interested in learning more about this situation and how it affects people in our community. So they encouraged members of ICE as well as members from the Legal Aid Justice Center who represent immigrants to come forward during a working session and explain these policies. So we had that opportunity to do so, and we certainly took it.
Where are they leaning now? I mean, you're saying there's a kind of division. Some are for standing with ICE, some are standing with the other side. So how do you think it should go, and how can they get pushed over to one side or the other?
Well, in terms of what the votes would look like right now, I'm not really sure. In the past, the jail has voted to uphold this policy, but they did not have necessarily all the facts before them. Now there's been a lot of data collection to see who ICE is really picking up and how, and more conversations with advocates as to how this is affecting members in the community. There are members on the board who are very visibly are supportive of the current policy, and there are members of the board who are opposed. Again, calling your local officials seems to be the only, or reaching out to your local officials seems to be the only way to encourage, a vote one way or another.
The argument that to eliminate what ICE is doing right now, picking these folks up, would make us, you said it makes it less safe, but other folks, like you say, make it feel that the neighborhood or the community is safer by ICE picking up these folks.
Well, we're not saying that ICE shouldn't pick anybody up. We're just saying that ICE should get a criminal warrant to pick people up. So if there really is a public safety concern, ICE can seek that criminal warrant. Another thing that's important for viewers to know is that we have a criminal justice system that's built to keep us safe. When I go before a judge for bond, a judge is going to determine whether I'm a flight risk, so am I going to show up to court the next time I have a hearing, but also, am I a danger to myself or the community? And that's really important. Our judges do a great job of risk assessment when making those decisions. So it's not as if our judges are releasing everyone into the public. It's that they're doing, really thoughtful analyses and deciding who should be released from our jail and who should remain until their court date. And at the court date, they're seen to be whether they're guilty or innocent. And if they're guilty, they will get, the punishment befitting of or at least mandated under the charge. So what we're saying here is we have a criminal justice system that's set up to protect our society, but with this additional system kind of floating in the background, we're saying that our local, criminal justice system isn't enough for people who aren't from the United States. And that has some really serious implications in and of itself.
You mentioned that the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail is consists of Albemarle and Charlottesville, but also Nelson County?
That's right.
Okay. So what about the other regional jails? How do they operate?
So there's variety. Some jails create partnerships with ICE where they're deputizing some of their officers to actually be immigrations
Can you
and
give
customs.
us, for instance, I know there's one that consists of Orange and Louisa.
Yeah. So with I mean, my understanding is that Culpeper has explored this option of what's called a 287G contract, which is a contract with ICE to deputize some of your local law enforcement as immigrations officers. Again, that's something that is really kind of threatening to a community when, there really is no difference between immigrations and customs enforcement and local law enforcement, because that means that there are swaths of residents who aren't going to trust local law enforcement as a result.
Association, again, you're referring to.
Exactly. Not to mention the fact that we're diverting our local resources towards immigration enforcement when, we have a whole federal government with its own resources to fund it. So.
Okay. So, so you're not familiar with the Louisa?
I've not done work with the
Okay.
Louisa jail
Okay.
to date.
So we're concentrating on the Charlottesville.
Sure.
Okay. So on the deputy one, do they get paid from ICE or do they get paid using taxpayers' money?
That's a good question. I think that would be something that's built into the contract, the 287G contract. There may be ways of funneling some federal funds to do so, but I haven't done that kind of cost analysis.
Okay. All right, so let's wrap it up. I mean, thank you for the information. I would like to know if specifically, and I think the audience would like to know specifically what they can do to remedy this this policy that we're facing here. And as you're saying, in many cases it creates problems.
That's
Especially if a person is working and having a family,
That's right.
and then they're taking out of that family, and the family no longer has that income or resources to survive here. Then we're creating a situation where they have to now go to the public assistance, which creates more of a burden upon the limited resources that the government has.
Sure. If they qualify, they can then turn for public assistance. A lot of immigrants do not qualify for public assistance, for example, but a lot of households are mixed households with U.S. citizen children. But I would encourage individuals to reach out to their local officials and encourage them to do away with this additional notification policy. It really is causing harm to residents through family separation, as you'd mentioned, but also through just a general public safety issue where if people associate immigration and customs enforcement with our local law enforcement, then they're going to bring with it a lot of distrust of local law enforcement, and that includes victims and witnesses who won't reach out when they need help.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Counselor. Again, we're going to wrap it up. This is Melvin Burris. I'm your host, and our guest has been Attorney Dina Sharuk, and we've been talking about ICE enforcement in our local jails. You really can get more additional information by calling the counselor at 434-529-1818, and hope we pick up the telephones and contact her to get additional information on what can be done to remedy the situation and help make our community a safer place. Also, the Neighborhood Law Center, you can see it on the website, neighborhoodlawcenter.com. You can YouTube it by just typing in Neighborhood Law Center. And again, we're on Channel 13 on Charlottesville Public Access TV on Channel 13 at 10 p.m. on Monday.